Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Pagetra. I am the Deputy Director with the North Carolina Division of Air Quality. Thank you for your participation tonight. This is the Division of Air Quality's public meeting for the International Tie Disposal Project Tie proposed facility. The purpose of the public meeting is to discuss the project with you and to answer your questions that you may have regarding the DAQ's permitting process, the air quality permit application, the draft air permit, the draft air permit review, and the draft environmental justice report. If you only have a comment, we ask that you join us next Monday night to provide your comment, or you may call and leave a voicemail, send an email, or send a letter via postal mail. The appropriate numbers and links are on the placeholder slide that we shared earlier. And I will go ahead and start sharing that again. So you can see on the placeholder slide information regarding links, as well as information for where to provide comments. You can also perform an internet search for North Carolina DEQ International Tie Disposal, and you will be able to find the web page that has all of the pertinent information relative to this project. I would now like to introduce the DEQ staff that are participating, starting with Heather Carter, the Division of Air Quality's Fayetteville Regional Office Supervisor, Jeffrey Cole, the Division of Air Quality's Permit Engineer from our Fayetteville Regional Office, Renee Kramer, DEQ's Environmental Justice Coordinator, and Zainab Nassif, DAQ's Public Information Officer. I would also like to introduce and thank Rahat Ashik, an engineer in DAQ's Central Office, who's our facilitator operating the WebEx tonight and making tonight's event possible for us. Thank you, Rahat. At this time, I would like to invite Jeff Cole, DAQ Permit Engineer from our Fayetteville Regional Office, to discuss the International Tie DAQ Draft Permit. Jeff?
Thank you, Michael. All right, I'd like to thank you for attending this public meeting about the International Tie Disposal Project Ties Draft Permit. Next slide, please. In this presentation, I will explain the air quality permitting process, describe permit classification for the proposed International Tie Disposal Project Tie facility, describe the equipment being permitted, summarize the draft permit requirements, and once I am finished with the presentation, we will open the floor for questions about the draft permit. Next slide, please. The permitting process consists of permit application, receipt, and review, verifying emission factors and process rates using the best available data, determining permit classification based on emission rates, determining application of which state and federal rules apply, writing enforceable permit requirements for the applicable rules, the step we're doing right now, engaging in the public participation process, and then finally taking final action on the permit. Next slide, please. After DAQ issues a permit, we are not done. Our compliance program kicks in. Each permit issued contains some combination of the following requirements to help the facility ensure and to help DAQ verify compliance with the permit. These include an application and maintenance plan, monitoring and record keeping, reporting process data to DAQ, and conducting source testing. DAQ also conducts unannounced inspections at the permitted facility to verify compliance with all permit requirements and to physically verify site operations. Next slide, please. The permit application we received was for a proposed biochar production operation to be located at 174 Marks Creek Church Road in Hamlet, North Carolina. And you can see the outlined property in the slide. Next slide, please. A permit application was received on June 16th, 2020 for a proposed facility that would use a pyrolysis process to create biochar product from railroad ties and or untreated wood. Biochar can be defined as a carbon-rich solid that is derived from biomass, which is organic matter from plants. This is heated in a limited oxygen environment. Review of emission rates and emission factors show that the International Tie Disposal Project tie facility has the potential to emit the following: less than 100 tons per year of particulate matter of less than 10 microns, as well as less than 100 tons a year of sulfur dioxide, greater than 100 tons per year of nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, and volatile organic compounds, and less than 10 tons per year of any individual hazardous air pollutant, and less than 25 tons per year of any combination or total HAPs. An air quality permit is required for this facility. The proposed facility is taking operational limits and installing controls to stay below the 100 ton per year of criteria pollutants. Therefore, it will be classified as a synthetic minor facility. Next slide, please. The facility's nitrogen oxide and carbon monoxide emissions will be kept under the Title V threshold of 100 tons per year by limiting the number of biochar kiln operations. Volatile organic compound emissions will be kept under the Title V threshold of 100 tons per year by the use of afterburners controls, which are naturally gas fired, and by limiting the number of biochar kiln operations. Next slide, please. The proposed biochar process consists of the following equipment: biochar kilns, each equipped with integral natural gas fired burners, which are each then controlled by a natural gas fired afterburner. Next slide, please. The facility will also operate several processes that, due to their levels of emissions, are considered exempt from air permitting under statute. It should be noted that these activities do generate emissions, which were evaluated in the permit application review. These emission sources include the crusher and kiln loading, the product handling and packaging line, the haul roads on the site, a diesel storage tank, maintenance welding activities, and biochar storage silos. Next slide, please. The biochar process consists of the following steps. The railroad ties are shipped to the site by rail car, stacked and sorted into either reusable ties, landscape ties, or those remaining which will be processed into biochar. These remaining railroad ties are shredded and then loaded into mobile pyrolysis kilns. The shredded ties in the kilns are then processed for 8 to 15 hours into biochar. The kiln is then moved to a cooling area for 8 to 10 hours. And then the biochar is moved to a processing line where it is cleaned and sorted in the enclosed processing line into sizes and loaded into either super sacks or silos. The following slide contains images, the following slides, excuse me, contain images of a similar biochar production facility located in Weld County, Colorado, and known as Biochar Now LLC. Please note that the proposed International Tie Disposal Project Tie facility may look similar to the biochar now facility, but not identical. Next slide, please. This photo is of a biochar kiln that has been loaded with shredded wood prior to the pyrolysis process. Next slide, please. The first photo on this slide shows a loaded biochar kiln with its lid attached. Note that each kiln is approximately 7.5 feet in diameter and 8 feet in height. The next photo is of an afterburner stack, which is approximately 8 feet in height. The final photo shows a loader placing an afterburner stack on a biochar kiln prior to the pyrolysis process. Next slide, please. The first photo on this slide shows a line of biochar kilns with their afterburner stacks, both connected to their computer controls during the pyrolysis process that produces the biochar. After the pyrolysis process is complete, the afterburner is turned off and the loader removes the afterburner from the kiln and closes the kiln's top hatch. The kiln is then moved to a cooling area. Next slide, please. After cooling, the loader then removes the kiln's lid and transports the kiln to the enclosed product handling and packaging area. Next slide, please. This photo shows the enclosed product handling and packaging line where the kiln's biochar is unloaded, cleaned, and sorted into different sizes, and then loaded into super sacks or silos. Next slide, please. The last photo shows the final product, biochar in super sacks, ready for shipping to the customers. Next slide, please. All right, the draft permit contains the following applicable state rules. First, the facility will be required to notify DAQ when they start operations. Source testing will be required 90 days after startup of the facility, as well as annually and periodically to verify the actual particulate matter, nitrogen oxide, carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds, hazardous air pollutants, and visible emissions from the process. The facility will be required to monitor afterburner temperatures and maintain the operating parameters established during source testing. Record keeping and periodic inspection and maintenance will also be required. The facility will have operational restrictions to be classified as a synthetic minor facility. They will also be required to do record keeping and submit to semi-annual reports to verify their operations. Next slide, please. These are the additional applicable state rules for which the proposed facility must comply. These include particulates from miscellaneous industrial sources, sulfur dioxide emissions from combustion sources, control of visible emissions, excess emissions reporting and malfunction reporting, particulates from fugitive dust emission sources, control and prohibition of odorous emissions, and emission rates requiring a permit that deals with toxic emissions. Next slide, please. Recapping the main points of this presentation, the majority of pollutant emissions are nitrogen oxide, carbon monoxide, and volatile organic compounds, each of which are reduced by add-on controls or limits on biochar kiln operations. Review of the facility emissions noted no toxic air pollutants that exceeded the rate requiring modeling. Compliance with emission limits will be verified through stack testing and continuous parametric monitoring. Note that all permit conditions included in the permit have a limitation or standard for which the facility must comply. DAQ verifies compliance through unannounced on-site inspections, source test observations, report reviews, and record reviews. Next slide, please. And if you've not already previously viewed the documents applicable to this permit action, here is a link to those documents. Please remember that the public comment period closes March 3rd at 5 p.m. Also, if you wish to email in your comments, here's the email address. And we ask you to please include in the subject title, International Tie. Michael?
Great. Thank you, Jeff. At this time, we will call on individuals that have registered to ask questions. Please ask your question within the 3-minute time allotted. Also, please remember to unmute your WebEx and turn down any speakers that you are using to reduce feedback. If there is a significant feedback, we will need to mute your line and attempt to return to you at a later time. We will call on individuals to ask questions until no later than 8 p.m. Rahat, please identify the first individual with a question.
Allison Alford, I know you selected to attend. Did you have a question?
Allison Allred?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Great, thank you. This was my first time using WebEx and I wanted to make sure I was doing the unmute correctly. Thank you for having me.
Yes, ma'am.
I had a question. I am a native of Richmond County and I'm also a member of the Clean Air Coalition. And one of the biggest concerns among community members is a lack of information dispersed by the International Tie Disposal and government officials about the project. And this lack of communication has many community members suspicious about this project's impact on our community as a whole. How and when does ITD plan to communicate to local residents about this plant's workings, the pollution controls, and economic impacts that are not present tonight?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. So my understanding is that International Tie Disposal has done outreach to both the local government as well as community members in the area regarding their process. There is a representative from International Tie Disposal that has registered to speak as a member from the community, and will be allowed to speak later in the process. Yes, I see the name on there. So at that time, perhaps your question can be addressed more fully. We've encouraged that facility, as well as any facility, to participate and to have meetings with their neighbors and to discuss the process, whether it's a modification or a new facility, and then also to discuss economic impacts as well as emissions impacts. So later on during the meeting, hopefully the ITD, the International Tie Disposal representative, will be able to respond to that. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
All right, Rahat, next person that signed up to ask a question, I believe, was Marty Butler.
I do not see Marty has joined. I'm not sure, Marty, if you've joined by phone, if you would press *3. Otherwise, we would move on to Deborah.
Okay, I'm looking through as well.
I do not see Deborah. Deborah, if I call on your names and you've joined by phone, please press *3 so I can identify you and unmute your line.
Okay, Deborah David. If you have joined via phone, please press *3. Okay, I see a call-in user. Do you see that, Rahat? Call-in user 27.
I believe, please identify yourself and ask your question, please. Thank you.
Yes, Deborah David. And my question is, will NCDQ complete an air modeling, especially for NO2, to address community health issues or concerns?
Ms. David, thank you for your question. For this particular facility, the size of this facility and the emission rates at this facility, air modeling does not fall into the requirements for the type of permit that's being requested. However, in the overall permitting process, all of the rules that are applicable to public health and to protect public health have been applied, as Jeff mentioned. And so there are limitations dealing with all emissions and then source testing that will be required in order to ensure compliance with the permit limitations associated with all the pollutants.
So I have another question.
Yes, ma'am.
Are there any similar biochar plants operating in North Carolina?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that question. So as Jeff indicated in his presentation, we learned a lot of the biochar process and from a facility that is operational in Colorado. To the best of our knowledge, there are no other biochar facilities in North Carolina, but we did spend an extensive amount of time communicating with the regulators in Colorado. We spoke with the permit engineers as well as the compliance engineers, collected the permits that were associated with that facility and the source testing that was performed at that facility. And we used all of that as part of the background research that we did in the process of developing the permit that we have noticed currently for public inspection. So thank you.
I got one more.
Yes, ma'am.
Is this going to be a permanent plant or a temporary plant?
Yes, ma'am. So in the process of permitting facilities, you know, our permits are typically for facilities that that operate over a longer period of time, but it's up to the facility in terms of their business operations for how long they plan on operating. That's not part of the permit application to define a period of time. So for this facility, it is probably more of a permanent facility for whatever that means. It could be 5 years, 10 years, it could just be a few years. That's up to the facility and their business operations.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, let's see. Rahat, I believe our next speaker is Jefferson Curry. Do you find Jefferson Curry on the attendee list?
Yes, you've been unmuted. You can go ahead and speak now.
Yes, I'm curious as to evaluation based on the EJ evaluator, the mapping done, and if there's going to be any more additional mapping going to happen, looking at it not just from 1 mile, but 2 mile, 5 mile, as well as other cumulative impacts based on this project, and this being a very heavily industrialized section, although very rural section of Richmond County at the same time. So I was wondering about that, and you know, just because it's rural doesn't mean it's not industrial, and this has already got multiple issues from big polluters in that area. So
yes, sir. So Jefferson, in terms of the 1 mile radius associated with the facility for the purposes of the EJ report, that's relative to you know, a qualitative assessment for any impacts related to emissions. The goal of the Division of Air Quality is to ensure that the national ambient air quality standards are met at the property line. And so even once you go past the property line, you know, going up to a distance of 1 mile was a reasonable assumption in terms of looking at any impacts associated with environmental justice. Renee, is there anything that you would like to add to the discussion regarding the evaluation around the facility?
Thanks, Michael. Good evening, Jeff. Hope you're doing well. We're currently not planning to do any other mapping looking at other distances, but it's definitely something we could discuss if that's something you're interested in potentially having us look at slightly farther out or slightly different. I'm happy to have a little bit more of a conversation with you. We did include the demographic information for the two nearest towns of Hamlet and Dobbins Heights to kind of address that there might be some potentially underserved communities in those areas that might not be within the 1 mile radius. But we were not planning to do any further mapping farther out, but definitely can talk a little bit more if that's something that you think would be helpful.
Or is there any plan on looking at this and evaluating it based on the cumulative impacts of other industrial facilities and polluters in the area? And which is required. Seems to me it's required. According to y'all, maybe not. But
so what I guess I would ask under what requirements?
EPA requirements and industrial polluters and environmental justice. Time after time, we've been through this back and forth. It doesn't seem that DEQ really goes the whole mile in evaluating projects based on cumulative impacts. We've seen this with AERP and other projects in Robinson and other counties. So I'm just wondering if this time you're gonna really go the whole mile in doing that and trying to show these communities that all of the cumulative impacts from other projects tied onto this project, not just within that 1 mile, but also in the greater region where there are significant impacts, that you're going to look at those and evaluate it based on what this facility itself will be putting out.
Right. So we do understand that the EPA and the federal government, the federal DOJ are really evaluating cumulative impact and cumulative impact analysis. And we are paying very close attention to any updates that may be provided by the federal government. But we're not aware that cumulative impact analysis being a requirement under Title VI. I don't know if Michael wants to speak to any of the air quality evaluations on that side.
Sure, thank you, Renee. And Jeff, what I will tell you is that in our permitting process that Jeff Cole, our permit engineer, touched on, he discussed the different levels of permitting that we undergo. And so we have different sizes of facilities, different emission rates of facilities. This facility falls into one of our middle tier facilities, you could call it, a synthetic minor facility. We have permitted larger facilities in the area, and as part of that permitting process, those larger facilities are required to do more extensive modeling. And in the process of doing that more extensive modeling, they're also required to include the emissions associated with other facilities nearby. So that modeling has been performed recently, and when that modeling, not for this facility, but for a different facility nearby, and when that facility's modeling was performed, it showed that the ambient air quality in the entire area met the national ambient air quality standards. So based on that, yes, sir.
Question, but yet no modeling for this facility. So it seems like that's an extra part of the mile you could go, even though it is a minor because of all the cumulative impacts. I understand the level, but is DEQ willing to go past that mile that you don't think you need to protect community and environmental issues?
Yes, sir. And that is a item that we will take into consideration based on your question tonight. That's part of the process this evening. We have our process in place that makes scientific judgments based on sizes of facilities and emissions and just the historic knowledge and judgment that we have on whether modeling is required or not. And then based on your input tonight, we'll take that into consideration on the modeling for this facility. So thank you for that. Yes, sir. Okay, next up, I believe we have Matthew Christian Rahat. Can you see Matthew's, is Matthew on?
Yes,
I'm here.
Matthew, you've been unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Matthew?
Thank you. I'd like to first thank the DAQ staff for spending time with me throughout this process to help me understand the various documents and reasoning that went into the materials that are being considered tonight. I'd like to address something that came up a moment ago about outreach, and there was a general understanding or mention that there was an understanding that outreach to municipalities had occurred. Beyond the required zoning consistency statement through the statutes, there has been no outreach to the municipalities or my municipality, which I represent, the city of Hamlet, as the city manager. I have several questions that I'd like to go through, and I'll conclude my questioning period and allow you to answer some of them. Particularly, I'm curious when air quality modeling is required and what the triggers for that are. I'm curious if creosote storage is regulated by NCDAQ and what the trigger point for that may be. For example, if I were to store large vats, open air storage of creosote, I'd wonder if that would be regulated by DAQ. I wonder how much creosote is present in the railroad cross ties that are proposed to be used for this site, and if any scientific evidence has been submitted to quantify that by the applicant or otherwise considered by DAQ. Have any additional permits been submitted to the Department of Environmental Quality or your agency more broadly? And finally, I have a question that starts with a statement, which is, at the time of the application submission, this property was zoned agricultural. This property was rezoned recently, and that rezoning has been challenged in court and is currently on the calendar here in Richmond, or will be shortly on the calendar in Richmond County. And I wonder if, my question is, can DAQ approve a permit for a property that is inconsistent with local zoning, and how that possible conflict applies in this permit review? And that concludes my questioning. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And I'm just still jotting down notes, so I think I'm going to make sure I got them all. Matt, I'm going to ask you back on in case I missed one. So the ones that I recorded is air quality modeling when it's required, creosote storage if there's any requirements surrounding large vats of creosote, how much creosote is still present in the railroad ties at this project, and if there's any scientific information that's been included, any additional permit requirements, and then a discussion about the zoning, and it's been rezoned, which has been challenged, and can the DAQ approve a permit that may be inconsistent with zoning? Did I get them all, Matt? Okay, I think I got them all. So if I missed one, Matt, please come back on and let me know. Okay, thank you, sir. Air quality modeling. So that's the first question. Air quality modeling is typically required with the largest of our facilities. Again, we discussed this one in terms of a mid-range facility, a synthetic miner, and then we have our larger facilities, Title V facilities, and then the largest of those facilities being the facilities that are subject to the federal Prevention of Significant Deterioration, or PSD rules. And in the PSD rules, those facilities are required to do National Ambient Air Quality Standard modeling in order to ensure that impacts that the facility's impacts comply with the NAAQS. And it's in that modeling that some inclusion of other facility emissions nearby. It's a complicated calculation, but some of those emissions are included in that modeling as well. So that's the first question. Second question, creosote storage. As far as large vats of creosote, our understanding is that there will not be large vats of creosote. Our understanding is that this facility will process used railroad ties that have been in service in the railroads for years, decades, possibly, have reached the end of life and are in the process of being switched out for new railroad ties. As I indicated, a representative of International Tie Disposal will be has signed up to speak later, so he may be able to address that within his time allotted. How much creosote is still present in any scientific information? Jeff Cole, could you join us again and share any information that you were able to gather regarding the creosote content in the used railroad ties?
Yes, thank you, Michael. We did research and tried to find as much information as we could find on this subject. We analyzed some scientific papers that looked at end-of-life railroad ties, and we're talking here 20 to 30 years old. And by that time, there's minimal volatilization of the creosote. It has pretty well weathered off through the years. So there is a small amount present on these ties. And we have also taken a site visit to another site in North Carolina that stores a large number of railroad ties to try to assess if there were any odor issues or any obvious odors off-site and around the ties themselves, and we did not detect any. So there's very minimal creosote on these used railroad ties that are being used. These are not like brand new ties, newly coated.
Sure. Okay. And so let's see, I have another, Matt asked another question about any additional permit requirements regarding the, I believe that was associated with the creosote ties. And so that would fall into the testing that's been required, including some of the specific source test methods that have been required, which includes, Jeff, can you discuss that for a second, the specific source test methods?
Yes, we have proposed, and let me grab this real quick here. We are going to be having them test. Okay, hold on for a second here.
I'll tell you what, Jeff, why don't you get that together real quick? Because I know you have it. It's probably on your desk. So take just a second and mute your mic while you look for it. And then let me answer the follow-up question that Matt Christian had. At the time of the application, the land was zoned agriculture. It's been rezoned. That rezoning has been challenged. Can DAQ approve a permit that is inconsistent with zoning? Our understanding is that according to the statute that surrounds this part of our permitting program, we can issue that permit. However, a condition that requires that the facility complies with all local zoning ordinances would be included. So again, our air quality permit deals with the emissions associated with the facility. The facility is still beholden to the local entity, the local government, in order to comply with their zoning requirements. So Jeff, can I come back to you for the testing requirement?
Can I jump in quickly for a follow-up?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I want to make sure that my, and I appreciate your answers, and I trust also that Jeff has the answer, because we spent some time talking about this a couple weeks ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago. But I want to make sure that my question about creosote storage being regulated by DAQ came across correctly. I'm aware that, and I didn't want to, I'm aware that there will be no open storage of vats of creosote. My question is really linked to the question that I think Jeff is finding the information on, about at what point, or is there a point rather, where the open storage of some known volume of creosote would be or may be regulated by air quality?
Okay, I have jotted that down. Let me get back to Jeff. Jeff wanted to speak about the air pollutants that are being required to be tested and the test methods. Jeff Cole, you want to discuss that real quick?
Yes, Michael. All right, the testing that is going to be done at this facility, proposed testing, is we are going to be testing 4 independent kilns and afterburners during each test requirement. We're going to be testing for particulate matter, filterable and condensable, nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, VOC, using DAQ approved methods, visible emissions using a DAQ approved method. And we're also going to be having them test for hazardous air pollutants and toxic air pollutants. We have in our proposed permit, we've proposed having them test with what's known as method 320 or Fourier transform infrared, which will look at all pollutants, HAP pollutants coming off the stacks as they're testing. And we are, as I said, we're going to be doing that at the 90-day point and then annually for a number of years.
Okay, and Matt Christian, I've got your question about creosote storage and at what point, what volume would require additional regulation. From an air quality perspective, we would have to do an evaluation regarding any volatile emissions off of stored creosote. And in this case, we have not been able to accumulate any data that would indicate that the storage of the ties would create volatile emissions alone that would require additional permitting. Again, in this case, the facility will have a permit, and but in terms of any other permits, not aware of any other permitting requirements. But we will take your question and evaluate it additionally. So at this time, I'd like to move on to the next questioner. I have, is it Jan Barnett? Jane Barnett, apologize. Rahat, are you able to identify Jane?
Yeah, Jane, you've been unmuted. You can go ahead and speak.
All right. Well, on the back of the last question, I wonder if there is any concern about storing large numbers of creosote-soaked railroad ties near water and causing water pollution in the effluents nearby.
Great. Jane, thank you for that question. Again, our understanding is that this process is designed to work with railroad ties that are at the end of life. They have been out in the environment for years, decades perhaps, and at that point, the amount of creosote left in them is much less than it is a new log, obviously. So our understanding is that there would be minimal amounts of any kind of additional impact on the environment right by the facility. However, we'll take that comment and question into consideration. And again, the International Tie Disposal representative may have a comment on that as well. So.
There was another part to my question, and that was just piggybacking his.
Yes, ma'am.
The Colorado biochar place that you've been able to study, did they handle creosote soaked material?
Yes, ma'am. My understanding is that they did not. Jeff, would you like to discuss the material that they were handling in at the Colorado facility?
Yes, Michael. The biochar now site currently is pyrolyzing a type of tree that has some worm damage. This is left over from forest fires and diseased trees, and they're able to turn it into biochar. They have done tests of their kiln system with creosote-coated railroad ties, and that's where we got some of our emission factors from. But they do not regularly. It's not something they do all the time. It's just for testing purposes.
I see. So there's been limited testing on this particular process.
Yes, ma'am. And that's part of the reason why we have some stringent testing requirements, including the use of a specific methodology and a methodology that should be able to analyze a broad spectrum of pollutants that may be coming off the process.
And I'd also like to mention that the testing that was done at biochar now, which is part of the emission factors we used in this draft permit, were on identical kilns and identical afterburners. So these are exactly the same size, the same capacity, operating in a similar manner. So it is apples and apples.
Oh, okay. The last of mine was, gracious, now I've gotten myself confused. I was also interested in an earlier question about the cumulative impact. And I know that there's the Enviva plant is nearby, and of course a large railroad hub. And it does seem to me as well that there should be cumulative effects, impacts being studied about all of those things.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that comment. As I indicated earlier, when a larger facility was permitted in the area, more expansive modeling was performed, and that modeling indicated compliance in the entire area associated with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards by a pretty large margin. And but we will take that comment and question into consideration.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Jane. Okay, so I believe our next individual who signed up to ask a question is Chad Gardner.
Yes, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Chad, go ahead, please.
My name is Chad Gardner. I'm a native of Richmond County and probably one of the closer homes that's going to be living to the facility. And my question is, what testing has the DAQ done to determine how much creosote is left in these old ties? I realize we've touched on that, and the research that I did with the Railroad Tie Association, which is a company that sells railroad ties, that's their business. They boast about how well a creosote rail tie holds up over a period of 30 years. And they start out with 20 pounds of creosote and only lose about 1% a year. Now, this is information coming from the company that sells them. And that would leave us for about 14 pounds per old railroad tie. And that's an equivalent of 7 million pounds if they were to store up to 500,000, which is what their permit is requesting. Another thing on that is when you guys went to see if there was an odor from a pile of cross ties that was stored somewhere, how many railroad ties were actually there? And what time of the year was it? Because it's obviously going to put off more odor in the summertime when it gets hot than the wintertime. Another question that I have is, let me find it. If this facility were to be built, what is their plans to handle situations where the surrounding residents are being affected in the way that it puts ITD out of compliance with their air permit? Is there a plan in place to deal with a situation after the plant was running to handle these type of situations? If not, I would like for there to be a plan put in place ahead of time. You know, some of these factors are unforeseen. The testing that was done in Colorado was on 3 kilns 5 years ago. I would also like to request that there be more testing because this will be a much larger facility. That's all.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chad. I'm going to depend on some of my staff from our Fayetteville Regional Office, Jeff and Heather, regarding some of the questions that Chad, you've asked, specifically regarding the creosote and the loss of creosote. Jeff, in your literature search and other research, have you been able to determine creosote loss in the railroad ties?
We did confirm that same 20 pounds of creosote on the new railroad tie, and the creosote itself is essentially pressurized, injected into the tie. So it's not just painted on, it infuses it, and it drops off over time. The best we could find was 15 to 25-year-old railroad tie would have something like 10 to 15% of the original creosote in it. I had not heard the gentleman's how much per year. That is news to me. That's a number I didn't know. But from what I found, there'd only be about 10 to 15% of the creosote left in it. Go ahead, Heather. Sorry,
Okay.
if you wish.
Yeah, and Heather, if you and Jeff want to discuss the visit to the other facility that stored railroad ties.
Sure. So just to further on what Jeff has mentioned, we did do research to try to determine the content of rail ties, the creosote in the rail ties, new versus end of life. We did try to determine what, if any, volatilization rate there was, if there was any difference from the volatilization from a new tie to an old tie. So we did try to find that information. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of information out there. What we've found through the I think it was the Railway Tie Association, was similar to what Mr. Gardner was just saying, is that there's about 20 pounds of creosote in a new tie, and at the end of life, there's about 13 pounds left. So you're talking about a 30%, 35% volatilization over 20 to 30 years. But what we've learned from some research papers, like with the University of Toronto, there have been some studies, small scale studies, but still studies nonetheless, that indicate that the volatilization versus the leaching, that there's a difference, and that the volatilization at the end of life is very minimal for all of the different compounds that create the creosote. So as far as the 1% goes, 1% for each tie over the amount being stored. We have not seen any information, about that. We'd be glad to evaluate it if you have information that you'd like to share with us. As far as our site visit goes, we visited that site in the winter month and tried to get a non-rainy, sunny day, and we were successful with that finally. And so they store approximately 2.5 million ties on that site, which is, it's the ITD site here is going to be a less than a quarter of that amount. And so, our site visit entailed driving by on the roadway. Could you smell it on the roadway? Walking in between the piles, could you smell it there? Was there dust and odors and things like that? And to be honest, I was quite surprised that the lack of odors off the site from storing that many ties at that facility. So that's the information that we've been able to come up with. Again, there was limited information, but we did do a thorough search to try to determine any volatilization rate that would be applicable to the storage of creosote-coated rail ties at the end of their life.
Okay. And then the last question I believe that Chad had was, is there a plan to deal with situations if the facility is out of compliance? And Heather, do you want to talk a little bit about your compliance program and what we do when we deem a facility to be in non-compliance?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Michael. So to address that question, I guess I would start with levels of how we verify compliance. And so we're looking at the reports that they submit on a periodic basis. We're also going on site and we're reviewing records, and we're also looking at the equipment and determining if we see things wrong. If we get complaints, we're investigating those and using the data that we've received and the data that we see on site, as well as our observations on site, to determine and confirm whether or not there are any compliance issues. And the stipulations contained in their permit, they have requirements that the facility must meet. So if and when our office documents that the facility is not meeting whatever the requirement is that's contained in that permit condition, then there are steps that we go through to work with the facility back into compliance. And of course, those are varied. For example, if it's a dust or odor type complaint, we have to verify and document that there is offsite impacts. And then those two particular conditions in their permit, they have protective measures in those requirements that require the facility to take additional measures to comply, should we document issues off-site. If it's issues more simplistic where, the source test indicates that they're not complying with an emission rate or an emission standard or a TEEP or a toxics or hazardous air pollutant, or even one of the criteria has air pollutants, then we would be able to obviously issue a notice of violation and then work through the steps for the facility to return to compliance, whether it's taking additional limits or adding on additional controls or any other changes in their operations. But the facility must comply with the requirements contained in the permit. And we are diligently, being on site and reviewing their records and reports and data and investigating any complaints lodged with our office as we receive them.
Great. Thank you, Heather. Okay. So I think we're on to the next individual that signed up to ask questions, Justin Dawkins. Rahat, can you identify Justin?
Justin, I do not see you. If you've signed up, if you've joined by phone, if you would press *3 to indicate so that I can unmute you. Yep. Justin?
Okay, so not seeing now. If Justin does join us later, we will do our best to get back to him. Okay, so next we have Lonnie Norton. And let's see, we have call-in user 10 has raised their hand. Rahat?
Yeah, go ahead and identify yourself and go ahead and make your comments, please.
Thank you. This is Lonnie Norton. And I would like to say thank you to the Department of Air Quality for giving us an opportunity to comment on this permit process. I have multiple questions, and some of them have been touched on to some degree, but I'd like to ask all of them if permitted.
Yes, sir.
My first question is, in the permit application, International Tire Disposal calculated their emission factors based on one kiln test conducted in 2015. Considering that the estimated nitrogen oxide emissions are extremely close to the threshold for a synthetic minor permit, shouldn't ITD be required to provide additional test data to support their estimates? And can the permit be put on hold until additional test data is provided?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. So as the facility comes online and if final action is taken to issue the permit, once the facility comes online, from that starting point, their emissions would be 0, and throughout that first year, their emissions would increase towards that synthetic minor limit. As they are operating, they will be required to do testing, and they'll be required to do testing, as Jeff and Heather indicated, on 4 separate kilns in order to give a good representation of what the emissions will be from the kiln afterburner combination. And then based on that, we'll be able to verify that the emission factors were correct. And if there are any changes in those emission factors, then we would go through a process of modifying the permit, either through operational limits or other modifications in order to ensure that they continue to comply. And you had a follow-up question, Lonnie?
Yes. I'm very concerned about fine particulate matter being produced from the shredding of the cross ties. And ITD is using emission factors from log bucking to estimate their emission factors for the chomper. How does cutting a log to size compare to reducing cross ties to 3-inch chunks? And what are the potential health hazards of particulate matter from creosote-treated ties in the air?
Great. Jeff, I'm going to ask to see if you have some additional information specific to the particulate matter partitioning associated with the cross ties.
Yes, Michael. The facility is as proposed that the chomper will actually be, and I had this in my presentation, I didn't speak it, but it was on the slide. It will be located in 2 intermodal containers, and they will have a conveyor going in, the chomper in the middle, and a conveyor going out to the kilns they're loading. And it's in, yeah, it was in one of the earlier ones of the slides. So they have actually, the company, we had told them that this was a concern, and they have enclosed it, which will, they're actually using a chomper that actually is a high torque, low speed, and it's not really a shredder. It kind of folds it over and strips it and cuts it, and gets it into the 12 by 18 to 3 by 4 inch sections of shredding that they need to load into the kilns. So we do not see a big issue with fine particulates from that operation directly.
Okay.
So it won't be low speed equipment, so it won't disperse it into the air?
Correct. It's low speed, high torque, and it also, it's going to be electrically powered, but it's going to be inside these containers, so it will not be just open to the air.
Okay, thank you. We already kind of touched on the smell, but I wanted to point out that, of course, there's going to be weathering over time, and an older cross tie won't smell like a new one. But if they're breaking down these cross ties, isn't that exposing fresh creosote to the environment? Isn't that increasing the surface area that will be exposed? And couldn't that intensify the smell greatly?
Jeff, as far as once the chomper does the destruction of the tie, at that point, that material is loaded directly into the kilns. Is that correct?
It is. As the plant is proposed, there will be no shredding of railroad ties into piles. This will go directly into the kilns, which will be covered and processed. And the actual storage of ties, those ties will be moving because they'll be processing them as they come in. So there's not going to be a large pile of ties that stay stagnant. They're going to be moving them in, and they're going to be chomping them and getting them into the kilns.
Yep.
So.
Okay. Great. Lonnie, thank you so much for your questions. Want to try to get to everybody that has registered, and then if we have an opportunity, we'll try to open it up. We are a little over an hour in, and we are just on number 10. We've had about 23 people sign up. So out of respect for everybody that did sign up, I want to try to get to the additional individuals. Rahat, I believe our next individual who signed up to ask a question was Lisa Gardner.
Lisa, go ahead.
Hello.
Hi, Lisa.
Hey, thank you guys for talking to us. We really appreciate it. My question is concerning fugitive dust and breathing issues and, the handling and stacking and all that. But I was wondering if you guys are aware of Georgia House Bill number 857 that was passed in 2019.
Not right off, ma'am. Be happy to learn about it.
Okay, so this group that we were talking to in Georgia, the Madison County Clean Power, they were going through a similar thing where they were actually burning the cross ties in their town. Well, I know this is going to be a cooking process, but the actual handling and the crushing and all that was causing a lot of fugitive dust and a lot of air problems for the people. Like the people that live within a mile would come out in the mornings and have literally black dust on their vehicles, having a lot of breathing problems just from handling a lot of creosote cross ties. Well, this group of people got the law in Georgia changed to no burning of creosote in the state of Georgia. So if this, I understand this is a different process, but if creosote is not that bad, how could they get the law changed to where they can't even do it at all in Georgia now? And, why are we still doing it in North Carolina?
Thank you, Lisa, for your question. If you wouldn't mind, if you could turn down the speaker in the background. Thank you. So thank you for that question. The Georgia House Bill 857, I had heard about it peripherally, not related to this project, but that's something that we can do a little more research on and try to learn about exactly what the process was in Georgia and the volume of material. And then again, as Jeff has indicated, the processing of the ties in this area related to dust and so forth, according to the permit application, what will be required will be all self-contained as opposed to being in the open and having stockpiles of material. So, okay, next question I believe we have is Heather Hudson. Rahat, can you identify Heather Hudson? Let's see, I've seen call-in user 16 raise their hand.
Sorry, I was on mute. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Heather.
Okay, so one of my questions we kind of touched on when I was reading the application, the complete Greenfield permit application, page 54, where it was the biochar now study that was conducted in October of 2019. It distinctly says that they loaded clean wood into the kilns. I know the kilns are identical, as was stated earlier, but to me, that's not comparing apples to apples if we're looking at emissions from clean wood versus creosote ties, no matter the age. So that's just a little confusing to me. And I also just wanted to ask, I've seen in some of your documents that ITD originally noted a alternate site that was already zoned industrial that they later withdrew months after their original application, where they once our site in Hamlet was rezoned. So is there any way to identify that alternate site, or why the one that was supposed to be agricultural was more ideal that they got the county to rezone it? Is there any information on that?
Yes, ma'am. So, Heather, I could directly speak to your last question, and then we'll circle back with Jeff regarding the first question. Regarding the alternate site, it is a matter of public record that they did submit a permit application for a second site. That site would have actually been, trying to orient myself, I believe a little bit further to the southwest. It would have been again, adjacent to the railroad yard, but further to the southwest and closer to Dobbin Heights. So that's the general location of where that site would have been. Regarding your first question, page 54 of the permit application, where it stated that the biochar now facility loaded clean wood into the kiln, that is accurate. They do use predominantly clean wood in their process. However, as Jeff indicated, they did do some tests using the creosote railroad ties. Jeff, can you address that again quickly?
Yes, Michael. The facility has proposed being able to process creosote coated railroad ties and or clean untreated wood. So their application, the emission factors they gave us were testing on both of those, so that they could see the effect of both of them on emissions, on emission factors. So that's why the 2019 was untreated and the 2015 was the coated railroad ties. So they told us up front that they wanted to have the option of possibly burning untreated wood. So they included those emission factors in their emissions estimate. They also added in a 25% safety factor on all of their emission factors, their criteria emission factors. So they built in an underestimate in their emissions so that they could well stay under the synthetic minor limits.
Okay, great. Let's see. In the interest of time, next speaker who signed up to ask a question is Janet Lynch. Rahat, can you identify Janet? Or Janet, if you called in, if you could press *3 to raise your hand. Okay, are you able to identify Janet, Rahat?
No, I'm not. We will have to move on.
Yep, I don't see a hand raised. Okay, so we'll move on from Janet, and we'll try to get back to her before the end of the evening. The next speaker would be Heather Hilliker.
Heather, you've been unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Heather, if you wouldn't mind turning down the speaker.
Certainly, 1 second.
We're getting a big feedback loop.
Is that any better?
Let's see. Talking. Go ahead and see if we can have you ask your question, and then we might ask you to mute so we could provide the answer.
Perfect. So my question has to do with the testing that was done for the HAPs and TAPS emissions. So the application indicates that the emissions factors for the hazardous air pollutants was based off of a Craven County facility and testing from that facility. And my question is why DEQ, I guess, saw that Craven County testing as being representative of what's going to happen at the biochar facility. It's my understanding that those are two different manufacturing processes. And at the Craven County facility uses very large combustion boilers of around 215 and then BTU per hours, whereas the biochar facility is going to have a very small kilns and afterburners comparatively. And my understanding would be that the VOCs and the volatile HAPs would be different under those two scenarios.
Mike, you were unmuted, so sorry, you may have to repeat that.
Oh, I was muted? Okay. I'm sorry. Heather, would you mind muting your microphone so we don't get the feedback? Okay, great. And we'll come back to you if we have time, if you have a follow-up question. So Jeff, can you address the choice of the sites for the emission factors associated with this facility?
Yes, Michael. The application, when they sent in the application, they provided what they believed were the best emission factors that they could find for any kind of hazardous air pollutants that would be coming off of wood combustion. That was the only information that they could provide. And they did a pretty good job, a pretty thorough job of looking around. And we also took a look around to see if we could find anything on hazardous air pollutants from biochar processing. And since Colorado is the only site and they hadn't done any HAP testing, so we had to use the best available emission factors we could. And that's also one of the reasons why we are going to be testing them directly for hazardous air pollutants and confirming that the emission factors that were used were reasonable and that they are still under TPER limits and such. But we used the best material we could find to do the estimates.
Right, and just to follow up on that, not only did we use the best data that we could find, but we're also requiring some pretty heavy testing requirements on the facility in terms of the testing that Jeff has mentioned earlier, and specifically the HAP testing that we'll be requiring. So, all right. Let's see, I believe our next speaker is Mark Barker, who signed up to ask a question. Rahat, are you able to identify Mr. Barker?
Hey, Mark, you've
Hi.
been.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Good evening. Hi. Yeah, got a few questions. First part will be about air modeling. Second part will be about air monitoring. You mentioned a couple of times that you had a facility that you did either analysis or modeling for. can you identify that nearby facility? And can you identify whether you did air modeling or did you do analysis? And regarding the air modeling, yes, the PSD rules require you to do extensive air modeling for criteria pollutants for a PSD permit. However, that does not prevent DEQ from doing air modeling on PSCD criteria pollutants for non-PSD permits. For instance, I know 2 synthetic minor permit that recently required NOx and SO2 and CO air modeling for those 2 facilities. And I'll add that the DEQ policy on air modeling for PSD criteria pollutants has a threshold of 40 tons per year for NOx NO2. This facility has the potential of doing 2.5 times that amount. Those 2 synthetic minor permits I mentioned earlier were a lot lower than what this facility will emit. So I will ask again, will DEQ consider putting this permit on hold to complete air dispersion modeling? And for the air monitoring, will DEQ do any ambient air monitoring in the area, and for what pollutants? Thank you.
Great. Thank you for those questions, Mark. So your first question regarding air modeling, was AirMod used, and what was can you identify the facility? I can. It is a matter of public record, and it was the Enviva facility based on the size of that facility and the anticipated emissions for that facility. Criteria National Ambient Air Quality Standard modeling was required, and that in the process of doing that modeling, other facilities' emissions were included in that as well. That's part of the process that's done in that form of modeling, and compliance with the NAAQS was demonstrated using not only that facility's emissions, but other facilities' emissions. And again, as I indicated earlier, it was by a decent margin that that compliance was demonstrated. You also mentioned that other facilities have been required to do modeling, and that some of those facilities, you mentioned that in the DEQ's policy on modeling that there's a threshold of 40 tons a year. That's for, again, we can get into a great discussion on our modeling, on our permitting program and the modeling requirements. Again, as I mentioned earlier, for the largest of our facilities, the facilities that are subject to the prevention of significant deterioration rules, okay, those facilities are required to do modeling. And then when they come in and they do a modification, they add something or they change something, if that modification goes to a 40-ton level, what's termed a significance level, then that's when modeling would be required again. So it's not just the 40-ton, it's the entire emissions across the facility plus a potential for an additional 40-ton, and that's when modeling would be required for those for the largest of the facilities. And with respect to considering modeling at this facility, we'll take that into consideration based on the feedback that we're getting today. Again, one of the things that we do is just a scientific endeavor that, based on our experience and knowing facilities, knowing emission rates, and knowing footprints for facilities, anticipating whether there would be any issues surrounding compliance with the NAAQS. But we'll take that comment into consideration. So thank you for that. I believe I addressed, going through my notes, I believe I addressed all those items. So, okay, next speaker that signed up to ask a question is Christine Gaines, I believe.
Yes.
Hi, Christine.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I'm asking a question about the Weddington plant. And how does it compare in size and process with this proposed facility? And also, have you consulted the people like the mayor, the environmental people in Mecklenburg and Union? I believe the plant straddles the border of those 2 counties, if I'm not mistaken. And finally, I'm interested in noise pollution. I haven't noticed, although maybe some of the earlier comments by Jeffrey Cole mentioned those, but I didn't hear them. So what is the track record of the other plant, and what are the town fathers from that area? Thank you.
Yes, Christine, thank you for your question. And just to clarify, the facility that has applied for this permit, International Tie Disposal, their corporate base is out of Weddington, North Carolina. It's my best of my knowledge, there's not a similar process in that area. What you may be discussing is the similar process that we were able to gather information from that is in Colorado, just north of Denver, Colorado. We're not aware of a process similar to this in the Weddington area. That's where the corporate offices for International Tie Disposal are. But for the facility that is located in Colorado, north of Denver, we did communicate with the regulatory agencies in that area. So, and then noise issues. We understand a concern regarding noise issues. And, what I could say is that noise issues are typically regulated by local government agencies. It's not within the purview. And I want to say this, the best way I can to you, it's not something that we have jurisdiction over. It's not something that we can include requirements over. Any concerns regarding noise would have to be dealt with by the local government agencies.
One last thought was about storage right along the highway. And I was wondering, after the events of 1/6, what about security for that area? Considering the combustibility of creosote.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that. And, as with any industrial operation, security of that operation is up to the facility itself, and ensuring that the facility remains secure and safe. Again, it's a little bit outside the purview of the air quality permit, but I can appreciate your concern. I would assume and I would hope that there would be coordination between the facility and local fire departments in the event that to plan before operations begin, in the event that there is an issue at that location. So, okay, that is, Christine, thank you for those questions. Next, we have Basil Polivka, and Rahat, can you identify Basil on here?
Yes, one second.
Okay.
Basil, go ahead.
Yes. Hi there. This is Basil Polivka, the director of the Pyrolysis Implementation Program with International Tie Disposal. I just want to first start by thanking the DEQ for taking these great questions and for their answers and for working on our permit. I try to keep track of all the questions. I don't have a lot of time. I might have missed something, so if I did, please forgive me. I met with some of the folks here and heard these questions, so hopefully I can answer them again in detail, or in short detail. All right, sorry. So first I want to address the first question about outreach. So what we did was we identified the folks that were nearby the site. We visited Dobbin Heights, its mayor and others. Of course, it's COVID, so we had to be aware of limitations of audience sizes. With the local representatives in Richmond County, residents local to the site, including the Gardners, the Nortons, and others, the local community college senators, and we also reached out to the city of Hamlet and others. We didn't receive a reply from them. So that's with regard to our outreach, what we did. And we were open to questions as we have been. We've been communicating with local residents as best we can. And then with regard to the railroad ties, there's a question about how old they are. Of course, it was addressed somewhat. So the legacy ties we're going to be processing at our plant are about 20 to 40 years old. They're end of life, so they're not even in complete pieces. They're kind of like just chunks. I hope that helps. And then with regard to water quality, ITD will be applying for a stormwater permit. Of course, it's outside of the purview of the air quality permit, but we'll be working with the state for that to ensure compliance with the law, of course, and any ordinances locally. And then with regard to security, the most recent question, which is a good question, we've definitely taken that into consideration. We're going to, of course, have security and ensure the site isn't just accessible by anyone. And then I think there was another question about the fire department. We're going to have a water line installed, and we'll have a very large one for any concerns like that, so to ensure that there's no fire. Yeah, I think that's everything there. I hope that helps. It's very brief. I'm sure I missed something, but thanks again.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Polivka. Our next individual who signed up to ask a question is Hope Norton. Rahat, can you identify Ms. Norton?
Yeah, Hope, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just briefly, the question I have is pertaining to the DEQ's Environmental Justice Report. According to that report, the University of Wisconsin Population Health Institute, in collaboration with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, they did a county health rankings of all the states in the U.S. And the rankings were based on health outcomes such as lifespan and self-reported health status, as well as health factors such as environmental, social, and economic conditions. And according to that 2020 report, out of all 100 counties in North Carolina, with one indicating the healthiest, Richmond County ranks 95th out of 100 in health factors and 93rd out of 100 in health outcomes. Additionally, that report revealed that deaths from cancer in Richmond County are higher than the state average. So when you take that into consideration, along with the fact that the EPA and the International Agency for Research on Cancer have determined that creosote is a probable human carcinogen, and in addition to all the other sites in the area, within the 1 mile area, in Enviva, you have CSX. There is, I believe in the report, it also talks about a toxic dump site that had an, I believe, back in the 90s. You take that all into consideration. Is it appropriate to have this site in such close proximity to homes, many of which are less than a quarter mile? That includes my home and several of our neighbors. We're literally across the street. And so, again, taking all that into consideration, compiled with all the other emissions that are already being emitted by Enviva and CSX, when you have homes right here is at the best location.
Great, thank you, Hope, for the question. Renee, did you want to address any of the parts of the question that Hope brought up?
Yeah, I would say, that the health factors and outcomes are definitely an important piece of the environmental justice report. But again, that's one piece of the information that is considered, and that, we're not tying causation with any of these health factors that we're reporting on in the report. And so just keeping that in mind, that there are a lot of complex pieces that go into those health factors and outcomes. Michael, I don't know if you want to speak to any more about that question.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So, and with that, what I'd also say is just that the evaluation of the facility being done and the associated testing that's being required of the facility, that one of the things that we want to emphasize is that final action on the permit, and if that final action is issuance of the permit, that's not the end of the process for the DAQ. That's really the beginning of the process. We go through and do extensive compliance work with the facility, including the requirement to do the source testing. And that source testing information is then plugged right back into the permit if any of the data is different than what was originally supplied. You know, there were some questions earlier regarding emissions data, a number of different types of questions regarding that. And when we don't have a tremendous amount of emissions data associated with the permit application, that's when we do require a lot of source testing. In this case, that's what's been included in the draft permit. Again, that gives us a good feedback loop to verify that the emission factors are correct. But beyond that, we will continue to do a tremendous amount of compliance work with the facility to ensure that their record keeping, their reporting is accurate, and doing unannounced inspections at the facility to ensure that they continue to comply. So. All right, Hope, thank you for those questions. I believe our next individual who signed up to ask a question is Barbara Brearley. You able to identify Barbara, Ms. Brearley?
Barbara, go ahead.
Hi, Barbara Brearley, and I have some questions about some of the things that have already been spoken on, but they bear saying again. My question is about the testing done for the air quality permit. I understand Biochar Now LLC, Colorado facility, was contracted to do the testing. If Biochar processes untreated clean wood, and International Tire will process the pesticide-treated creosoted wood, what makes such a test valid? And I further pose questioning about this testing done by the comparison that Biochar Now conducted the test on 3 kilns of clean wood, whereas International Tire will process 160 kilns per day of dirty creosoted wood. The Biochar test was run, I believe, in 2019, and it was a test of 3 kilns, and there was a test of treated wood, and that was 1 kiln in 2015. Over 5 years ago, 1 kiln of the dirty wood that we're talking about. So the old expression says, how does that meet the smell test? And I'm not talking about it, the odor. Okay, so my question is, can DAQ go forward without further testing? And will it accept the air permit application of International Dye with what appears to be insufficient and inappropriate testing? And most particular, in light of the preponderance of other air permits already showing an overabundance of emissions in this census block. And that was one question that I had, but there's been so much talk about the creosote that I'd like to add this. Creosote is a byproduct, of course, of coal tar, and it's composed of hundreds of harmful chemical compounds. It's a registered pesticide used as a wood preservative. EPA has approved it only for outdoor commercial use. It's classified as hazardous waste. Creosote and materials containing the creosote, such as railroad ties, must be deposited in a special landfill. So what we've got, folks, here is instead of a hazardous landfill with the usual disposal of railroad ties, it's going to be a hazard dump here in our county. And I just wonder if any consideration has been given to the usual hazardness of the cross ties, and then the fact that how many times do we hear about the hazardous spills on railroads and the ties that no telling what has been spilled on the ties in the past, and to what extent are we opening up for ourselves the delivery of a super hazardous brought here and won't even know it and stored in 500,000 cross ties. And so that's of concern to me. And the final thing is, in light of today, has any thought been given to the release that fine particle matter is linked to a person's vulnerability to more serious cases of COVID-19, asthma severity, and other such diseases. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Barbara, for your time this evening. So, the first items that you started to discuss was regarding the testing being done at the Biochar Now facility, specifically the untreated clean wood versus the creosote wood. And you're correct, and I believe Jeff has mentioned this, and Jeff, feel free to chime in if you'd like. The Biochar Now facility in Colorado does process primarily the bug-infested wood that occurs in that area of Colorado. And purpose for that is to reduce the fire load. Part of the purpose is to reduce the fire load in the forest there by removing that material and then creating that biochar that can be used commercially. As far as the creosote treated wood, having been tested, that was performed as a matter of gaining emissions data associated with the using the creosote treated wood in a kiln associated with making biochar. One of the things that we do is that we continually try to gather information associated with a facility and with the emissions associated with that facility. And as I mentioned earlier, when we don't have a tremendous library of data associated with that facility, we require testing. And sometimes significant testing. In this case, that's what we are requiring of the facility, not just for criteria pollutants, but also for hazardous air pollutants associated with the oxidation or the combustion of the gases that come off of the kilns. So we are requiring a tremendous amount of testing associated with it. As far as the number of kilns, it is a selection of a number of kilns, 4 kilns as opposed to just 1 kiln per se, and doing a spread of all the pollutants associated with that. In the process of making the biochar itself, the concept is that each of the kilns will operate very similarly in order to make the similar product. So we feel comfortable with testing a cross-section of 4 kilns, and those 4 kilns would be different through each of the testing programs as the testing is required over a period of time. Jeff, is there anything you wanted to add regarding the testing?
The testing in Colorado, you are correct, ma'am. The testing that was done in 2019 was on the untreated wood. The testing that was done in 2015 was on railroad ties. Both of those testing efforts were observed by Colorado environmental officials and were deemed to be correct, and the correct methods and all the requirements were met. As Michael has said, these kilns, we're going to be testing 4 kilns and 4 different afterburners. The afterburners themselves operate at temperatures in the 1600 Fahrenheit range. So they are going to have, to our knowledge, and based on the testing we've seen, they have very good destruction efficiency of anything that's coming off the kilns. And also, I mentioned in my my presentation, pyrolysis is not combustion of the wood itself. It's the selective heating of the wood to reduce it down to carbon, to biochar. They do not want combustion because that is not the product. That won't give them the product they need. So we're going to be testing over the 8 to 10 hour life cycle of the kiln, and we're doing it in 4 independent kilns. So we think we're going to get a very good look at how the operation is going and the emissions.
Yep. And Barbara, I believe one of the last questions that you asked, you spoke about particulate matter, fine PM, and the effects associated with COVID. We are aware of some studies associated with that, and we look forward to learning more about that and learning that through the scientific process as that data is then incorporated in the review of particulate matter standards. And once that is accomplished, we would be able to incorporate those standards and any further limitations into air permits. So, all right. I believe our next speaker is Virginia Shelley. Rahat, can you identify Virginia?
Yes, Virginia, if you've called in, please press *3.
Okay, I'm seeing call-in user 15. I didn't identify call-in user 15 previously.
That was Barbara.
Okay, it was great. Thank you. Okay, Virginia. Okay, I'm seeing a call-in user 26.
Please go ahead and identify
Hi.
yourself and make your comment.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, is this Virginia?
Yes, it is. Thank you for taking my call and my
Yes, ma'am.
question. I have several questions. How many people will be working at the plant in Hamlet, and how many people will be overseeing the kilns per shift? That's my first question.
Yes, ma'am. That information, Jeff, was there anything included in the permit application? Typically, we don't get into the personnel associated with operations at the facility, Virginia, but I'll just see if Jeff, was there anything mentioned in the application?
There wasn't anything mentioned directly in the application, but I just noted that Basil Polivka did mention just now that it was going to be 55 people are going to be employed. I do not know about supervision over the actual kiln process itself.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay. My next question is this a shell corporation? And does the corporation have the assets to correct any catastrophic event that may occur, or will Hamlet be responsible for any sort of cleanup that could occur?
Virginia, again, that's a great question. To the best of our knowledge, this is not a shell corporation. In conversations with the corporation, they've been in business. I believe it's approximately 50 years, something along those lines. And so, you know, that's just the normal interactions that we have with facilities in terms of learning about them, similar to interactions we have with the public when we have conversations with them. And as far as do they have the assets regarding any catastrophic issue, again, that's typically not a part of the air quality permit in terms of looking at what would be required of the facility. You know, if the facility were to, you know, say, have an issue at the facility, they would be responsible for that as the property owner or as the leasee of that property.
Okay. That's it. Thank you so much for taking my question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Virginia. Okay. Rahat, I believe Kathy Richardson is our next person who signed up to speak.
Kathy, if you've called in, please press *3.
Okay, so a call-in user 24.
I'm here if you can hear me.
Yes, we sure can, Kathy. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good. You've covered some of the questions that I have, and I appreciate you're taking the time. One question is about the if the plant is located here, which we hope it's not going to be, your team will be responsible for checking the air quality, you said? Someone from your office?
The responsibilities for the Division of Air Quality is to ensure that the facility is operating in compliance with their permit. We do that through a variety of means: source testing, reporting, record keeping, and doing unannounced inspections of the facility.
Okay, will those results be shared with the public when you do a testing, so that we're reassured that we've tested and everything's on the up and up as it's supposed to be? Or will it be will the public not be privy to that knowledge?
No, ma'am. Everything that we do is open to the public. And as a matter of fact, I'd like to take just a minute to highlight a project that our Fayetteville Regional Office Supervisor, Heather Carter, worked on in order to make information more readily available. Heather, would you like to discuss how the public can get that information?
Absolutely. So on our website, there is a, Michael, you'll have to forgive me on a blank. There is a link for public records. I think it says public records review. But if you go to the DAQ website, there is a link for viewing public records. And once you click on that link, it'll take you to a table. Very clearly, it'll define that you can select by facility name or by county, or by any other of the descriptors there, the type of document you're looking for example, and you can search all of the publicly available records that have been uploaded at that time. That public record availability does not go back in time as far as we'd like to right now. Over time, we may continue to go back through our files and load more data, but currently we do have a good listing of compliance information related to permits, as well as the final signed permits on our website. Like I said, searchable by facility, facility ID, county, and that type of thing. And you can download those directly from that site.
And will it be in layman terms so that, not being a scientist, we would still understand what it is?
So all of the permits, I'm assuming you've had an opportunity to view the permit information for this facility. So all of the permits are written with standard language. And if you have any questions about how to interpret or understand what you're reading, you can always feel free to call our office and ask for anybody on staff, and we'll be glad to walk you through what that document says and what it means, whether it's the permit or a source test or a compliance letter, whatever it is. If you have any questions about how to read it, we'll be glad to walk you through that.
Okay. And is there any research that's been done on the employees that work in these facilities as far as any deterioration of their health? We've been given some information about that they are walking around with oxygen tanks on in the plant, that type thing. Is there any research that you all are familiar with related to that?
Related to this specific facility, I am not, and if Jeff or Heather are, they can chime in. In general, facilities may have some requirements in certain areas of facilities to carry what are called breathing packs in the case of an emergency. But in general, the employee health is governed under OSHA rules. Our jurisdiction starts really at the property line in terms of ambient air quality, and obviously we continue to regulate the operations within the facility to ensure compliance with the air quality rules. So real quick, I want to be very cognizant of everybody's time. At 7:53, we do have a few additional questioners, and then we'll try to get to a couple who may not have registered. But as Heather mentioned, if you were to go to the DEQ's website and search for the Division of Air Quality, as you scroll down, you can find under compliance the tool that Heather mentioned, Public Record Search Tool. And when you click on that, you can find, you can search by the facility's name in order to get all of our public records associated with that facility. I'm taking a few extra minutes to highlight this because this was the public manager project that our regional supervisor, Heather Carter, proposed and executed. And so I'm just a little extra proud of her. It's all of our records are publicly available, but we have always strived to make them more readily available, and Heather was able to do that through this tool. I also want to just highlight an additional piece of information on the air quality page. If you scroll through the top items, you'll see an ArcGIS web tool. And if you were to click onto that, then you can zoom into any part of North Carolina, including the area around Hamlet, and then be able to get information on any of the facilities there. And that also includes a link to documents associated with that specific facility. So.
Okay,
right.
one quick question. If
Yes,
you
ma'am.
come in and do an air quality test and something's happened and it's way off from what it's going to be, is there any assurance that the company has some kind of signal or warning to the community, stay in the house, don't drink the water, or anything like that? Is there an audible siren that will go along with this, or some kind of emergency alert?
Yes, ma'am. I understand. Associated with this facility, there's not an anticipation of emission levels that would require such a thing. That would be outside of our requirements to begin with. Typically, we see those kind of alarms and such at some of our larger facilities and some of our chemical facilities that would have alarms along those lines. So,
okay, thank you very much.
yes, ma'am. Okay, let's see, that was, and now I'm getting mixed up. That was Kathy Richardson. Thank you, Kathy.
That's correct.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank
you,
you.
Kathy. All right, so Rahat, I believe our next speaker that signed up to ask a question is Polly Cobb. And let's see, I saw call-in user 21 raise a hand.
This is Polly Cobb.
Hi, Polly.
Hi, thank you. My question is, how often does the DAQ do the unannounced visits in a year?
Yes, ma'am. So Jeff or Heather, would you guys like to address that question?
Ma'am, we do not have a defined time. Heather, do you want to step in here? You might be able to compliance here better than I could.
Curious about the number of those.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So on an annual basis, we commit to looking at going and inspecting and reviewing records and confirming reports and that type of thing, going to these facilities once every year. That does not include any stack test observations that we will also go and observe in person on site. And like I said, if there's any other complaints or issues, we do that in addition to the once per year annual inspection. If there's ever any kind of a compliance issue that seems to be lingering or that we're concerned about, there being an issue, then we would obviously go back more frequently. We're not limited to once a year. That's just our basic commitment. And we also, because we're a regional office and we travel throughout our region on a daily basis, we have people who just drive by our facilities and observe them and see what's going on periodically. So we are around the facilities more than once a year, but our minimum annual inspection is once a year.
All right, I was just, all right. Who guarantees the regular testing for emissions count then?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Who will guarantee the regular testing for emissions that the company is supposed to do?
When you say guarantee, what do you mean exactly?
Well, you have reports, you said that you check once a year. And so how are we to be assured that the company is doing their regular emissions checks?
I understand. Okay, so the required source testing is outlined in the permit, and the facility has to submit paperwork before that test is conducted, letting us know how they're going to conduct it, and our folks in our central office review that. We call it a protocol, and make sure that everything looks like it should for being the testing being done according to the EPA method. And so we are aware of the test prior to it being conducted. We are on site while it's being conducted. And then within 30 to 60 days, depending on the rule and how the permit's written, they have to submit the results, which again, our central office stack test folks review and confirm that the test indeed was a valid test. And so does that answer your question about how we evaluate their testing?
Yes, Does DAQ or DEQ have the ability to close a facility?
Polly, that's a great question. Ultimately, in the cases of extreme noncompliance and the facility not complying with the permit or rules and regulations, we can pursue the process of revoking the permit. And in the process of revoking the permit, we could pursue court-defined injunctive relief that would require a facility to cease operations.
Okay. You all have made a lot of remarks about, what you're requiring and so forth. Do you have a date when you will or will not issue the permit?
Yes, ma'am. So the way our rules are structured, today we're having a public meeting, which is just it's not within our rules. It's an opportunity for us to have this engagement where we can really have you ask us questions and to the best of our ability answer them. What we announced was a public hearing, which will take place next Monday. And the comment period ends a couple of days later, according to our rules. And I could give you a bunch of bureaucratic language about rules and so forth.
We don't need that.
No, ma'am, we don't. But in our rules, what's required is that the director take final action on the permit application within 30 days of the end of the public hearing. So the public hearing is next Monday. Within 30 days of the end of the public hearing, final action will be taken on the permit application.
All right. Thank you very much for your time and for your help.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Polly. All right. Rahat, I believe our next speaker is Carol Venable.
Carol, you've been unmuted. Go ahead.
I did not sign up to ask anymore. I think it's been answered, the ones that I had concerns about.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So at this time, it is 8 o'clock. I mentioned earlier that we were going to take questions up till 8 o'clock. We did start at 6:05, and in the interest of individuals who may have been with us the past couple of hours, we want to open up the lines to additional questions. So if somebody is on the WebEx and they want to add to the chat a question, then we can address that. Otherwise, if somebody has called in and they would like to ask a question, please press *3 so we can identify that you're interested in asking a question.
And Wheeler, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think most of my questions have already been answered. I do have one left. These railroad ties that are coming in from all over, all over the United States, have been under railroad tracks for years. You're saying 30 to 40 years. Has there been any study about how much diesel fuel and those kinds of things from the actual locomotives have been leaked into these, and they may be cooking right along with that creosote?
Let's see. I'll see if Jeff does have any information regarding that. If any of that was included, what I would say is that diesel is a common fuel that's used in industrial boilers. And in this case, if there was any diesel in the pyrolysis process, it could be volatilized and would be oxidized. Excuse me, sorry, getting a little too technical. It could off gas, and then in the process of the afterburner associated with the kiln would then be combusted at that stage. So Jeff, was there any information that you found?
Specifically on, I'm sorry, I was.
And no problem. The question was, a number of these ties have been sitting in the environment for 20, 30, 40 years with railroad engines traveling over them where diesel spills could have occurred, and if there had been any information regarding diesel content in the ties.
No information that we could find directly on any kind of diesel spilling on the ties themselves. As we said, they've been in the environment for a very long period of time, and I have not found anything. We did not find anything on that. We can do some, we can look at that and see what we can find on it, but no, not directly.
Okay. Do we have any additional individuals either on the WebEx or on a phone line?
Yeah, Teresa, Vic, go ahead.
Are they unmuted?
Yes, Trace, how
Oh,
are you
hi.
how are you doing?
How are y'all? What the question I had, and Mark Barker asked it, but I think it must have gotten looked over. Are you all going to be doing any air monitoring in the impacted community?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that follow-up question, and I do see that listed here. I was trying to get to all the items, and I may have missed that. Yes, ma'am. As you may be familiar, and as anybody can learn on our website, and we encourage you to, we have a wide network of monitoring stations across the state. As a matter of fact, we've got one of the larger air monitoring networks in the country for the size of our state, and
Right. Sorry to interrupt, but in the specific community, I'm aware of the air monitoring network, but in the actual community itself, like right at the fence line and throughout the individual community.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. With regards to our network, it's a resource issue in terms of the number of monitors that we do have, and we do have deployed. And anytime that we site a new monitor, we do have requirements in terms of not only siting, but then also the amount of time that that monitor should stay in that location. We did site a monitor in a community in northern North Carolina.
In Northampton County, I'm aware.
Yes, ma'am, we did. And so we were doing monitoring there for a period of time. Again, that's a resource that, it was a substantial commitment from us to invest in that resource and to have that there from not only the equipment, but also the utilities that were required to be devoted to that site, and then the manpower in order to operate it. So we're committed to continuing doing that for a period of time. Once we complete that, looking at other sites as a possibility, but at this time, there's no plans for specific air monitoring at the fence line or close to this facility.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Marvin, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes. How are you doing, Marvin?
Okay, fine. My question is, with all this, if this project goes through, with all the machinery that I saw the picture there of front end loaders putting the catalytic converters on top of the kilns and stuff, and you're going to have the traffic of the semis bringing in ties and leaving. Will the emissions of these pieces of machinery and these trucks, will that add to the air quality in the vicinity? Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. In general, when we look at the evaluation of a specific site, it is the equipment that is on site. The additional truck traffic, et cetera, is not included in the evaluation of that site. In this particular case, our understanding is that virtually all of the railroad ties will be delivered via existing rail line, and that at this time, the product would be, again, loaded onto the railroad line for delivery. Okay. Let's see, additional questions that we may have, Rod?
Yeah, Susan Halbert, go ahead.
Okay, we're getting a little bit of feedback. If you're not speaking at this time, if you can mute your line, please.
Will the labor force be local or be from outside the county?
Thank you for that question. I apologize. Your name again was?
It was Susan.
Susan, okay. Susan, that is information that is truly up to the facility in terms of their labor plan. That doesn't get into the air permit itself, but I would encourage you to reach out to International Tie Disposal for information regarding the labor force.
Michael, Hope Norton already asked a question and she asked a question again. I've unmuted her.
Okay. Hope? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, and I meant to also early thank you guys for having these meetings and public hearings so we could ask some questions. So apologize for missing that the first time.
That's okay.
So my question is, the permit application shows that the capture efficiency for particulate matter and the chomping and product processing are both 90%. And how is this efficiency determined? How did they come to that 90%?
Yeah. Jeff, are you still on? Can you address that?
I am. Thank you, Michael. Ma'am, what we do is we take a look at similar permits that have already been written and similar permit applications, and we look at how they performed based on the kind of enclosure that would be. If it would be like a 3-wall enclosure, it would just be a cover, like a rain cover. But this one, it is a completely enclosed in except for the two ends where the conveyor comes in and where the conveyor comes out. This is an enclosed chomper. So we've seen similar emission sources in that kind of control scenario, which reduce emissions by in the neighborhood of 90%. So it's experience, and it's also based on what are known as AP42, which are EPA emission factors that looked at similar sources and looked over emission testing and noted that this type of enclosure is this efficient normally at controlling particulates in this particular case.
Okay,
Does
thank
that
you.
give you kind of what you, sorry the engineer in me if I went too far there.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you.
I gotcha.
All right. Okay, Rahat, do we have anybody else?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, I see. Okay, so we addressed Amy
we have-
Brown's and Ann Wheeler's questions.
Oh, we addressed Ann Wheeler's. Amy just raised her hand.
Okay. Amy?
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for having the open forum where we could ask questions. One of my biggest questions is, you said you reached out to someone or the entity of the city of Hamlet and you didn't receive a response. Who did you reach out to?
Yes, ma'am. So that was actually Basil Pavlika. I apologize. With a name like Pajetra, you think I could get other names right. The gentleman who is associated with the facility indicated that they had reached out to the city of Hamlet, I believe. So I tell you if, and I'm trying to find, yes. So that would be the answer. It was the facility themselves that said that.
Okay, one last question.
Yes, ma'am.
I am an educator here, and on the list of entities that should be, prepared for the coming or possible coming of this business, my school was located on that list. Will you be reaching out to our central office as a whole or each school individually?
Yeah, so great question. Let's see, is Renee still on our call?
Yes.
Hi there. Yeah. So I have done the outreach to the schools. What I did was each school individually through the webpage addresses that I could find. Unfortunately, some of them seem to possibly be a little out of date. So if you have specific folks that we should reach out to from schools that you would recommend, we're happy to do some more outreach if you recommend specific folks.
That would be awesome, Renee, because my boss, when I spoke to her today, she was not really, she's kind of aware of what was going on, but not really. So I know nobody had reached out to her specifically. I don't know if you want to reach out to our central office as a whole, and then they collaborate with the schools with your information. I am very, very concerned about this company being so near our main water source. It is not just for the, living right there, because a lot of the people that live right there may or may not have wells, but the water source is located close to this facility, and that is a huge concern for me.
Thank you, Amy, for that question. Amy, do you have a particular person that you would suggest Renee reach out to?
Renee, I would reach out to Dr. Jeff Maples. He is our superintendent of schools, and he would be in charge of the 4 schools on your list. And so it would be Jeff Maples at richmond.k12.nc.us.
And if you would just type that in the chat, that way we have the correct email. That'd be great.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Okay, let's see. Did Matthew Christian raise his hand again?
I did.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, Matthew.
For the opportunity to ask a brief follow-up. I just want to make sure I understand Renee's role in this question about outreach. While I understand the concern about it is not relevant to the air quality permit and the review, as it's not a requirement, I have reached out to Mr. Polifka to ask if he could resend that outreach effort in case I missed it, but the city has not received it. And that kind of gets me back to my question in terms of Renee's role. I've been in contact with the staff, but I'm just not sure I understand what other outreach may be going on within the agency. And that concludes my question. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, so I am the Title VI and Environmental Justice Coordinator, and so our program is responsible for the environmental justice, the draft environmental justice report that has been posted in collaboration in association with the other permit application materials. And that's to really get an idea of the demographic makeup surrounding the proposed facility and help inform our outreach efforts. And so I work really closely with the public information officers, and Zainab is the Division of Air Quality Public Information Officer, and it looks like she would like to speak a little bit more to that.
Sure, thanks, Renee. Yeah, Renee and I do work very closely together on outreach, especially to environmental justice communities. In this situation, outreach that was done included letters that got sent out to the local health department, the county commissioners. I did speak to the Hamlet mayor at one point as well. And there's additional outreach that was done, but it did comply with the environmental justice report, which is in our on our website. So that would be a more detailed list of what outreach was done. But we also spoke to local community members. I had the pleasure of talking to Ann Wheeler a little bit. I've spoken to Chad as well. So some of that outreach was a little bit more informal, but still making sure that community members were aware.
Okay, great. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Zainab, and thank you, Matthew, for your question. Okay, do we have any other individuals that have raised their hand or asked questions, Rahat?
Not at this time.
Okay. Super. So, well, we've called on all individuals that registered to ask a question, and we've called on all open lines associated with tonight's public meeting. We thank you for participating, and we hope that we have been beneficial in answering your questions on the permitting process. Please note the next Monday, March the 1st, we will be holding the public hearing for the International Tide Disposal Draft Permit. On the placeholder slide, you can find the link to the International Tide Disposal Project Tie website that we've created that houses the draft permit, the draft permit review, the draft EJ report, as well as the permit application. We encourage you to take a look at that and to provide comments to us next week during the public hearing. If you're not able to attend the public hearing, then we encourage you to provide comments via phone line, and that phone would be 919-707-8714. Or you can send emails to our daq.publiccomments@ncdiener.gov email address. We ask that you type International Tie into the subject line. I will say that all comments that we receive, whether they're live next Monday or on the phone line or via email or even U.S. postal mail, any way that we receive those comments, they will all be weighed the same. So if you're not able to make it next Monday, please provide comments in other forms that you choose to. Again, please take a look at the website. And if you choose to provide a comment next week, make sure that you register to provide that comment. We ask for registration just so we can facilitate these meetings more effectively and you could have a better experience during them. So at this time, I'd like to say thank you to all of the staff that participated this evening. And I'd like to say thank you to all the members of the public that participated as well. And we look forward to seeing you next week or reading your comments provided otherwise. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Yeah, thank you.